Hey y'all, it's the Loud Little Ducky. Today we are going to be talking about Karen Reed's key cycles and understanding what a key cycle is and what an ignition cycle is. And we are going to focus mainly on ignition cycles that also issue a key cycle. And Trooper Paul having a lack of knowledge in the data to explain it to lay people. But let's jump in. So I'm going to play a video from Critical Minds True Crime. You can follow them on TikTok and on YouTube. And they break down some reconstructionist stuff and explain things to where normal people can understand. And so I'm going to let this clip, this is not even the full clip, but this clip also is going to be basically how we talk about today's video. But if you want to see,
let's
they
start
have
with the
many
basics.
videos on the
This is a
Karen
simple
Reed trial
ignition
and
switch.
many others.
When you turn the key
But
fully,
let's
you'll hear
watch
the engine
just
start.
this explanation.
After hearing it start, you'll release the key and it falls
explain what
back
key
to its on
cycles
position.
and ignition cycles
Then, of
are.
course, if you turn it back fully, it turns the car off. Now you can stick the key in and turn it simply to the on position. This is a key cycle. Then when you start the vehicle, this is an ignition cycle. All these cycles are recorded in logs. Every single time since the birth of the vehicle, every key cycle is recorded and logged. Even when you fully start the vehicle, creating an ignition cycle, there will always be a key cycle logged. So when Alan Jackson asked Trooper Paul if every ignition cycle has a key cycle, the answer should have been yes, but that would have hurt his case. So he was either deliberate in his deception, or at the very least, he lacks the expertise in his field to know better. Let's view that interaction.
Every ignition cycle includes a key cycle, correct?
In a sense.
By definition, it has to, right?
It doesn't have to.
To clarify, regardless of the expert's opinion, every turn of the key is a key cycle that is recorded.
Okay, so I hope that lets you know with a visual and an audio explanation explaining the key cycles. So let's dive in further. When we look at this exhibit that was produced in Trooper Paul's testimony, it has 164 and further, which is where their testing started. At odometer reading 12,665 is where their testing started. So let's say that is for sure true. And we are going to work backwards to the events using key cycles, which are also ignition cycles, that we know of for sure. And if there are extra ones in between, that makes this even further off. But according to Trooper Paul, the key cycle 1162 is where they are stating that Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe. And if we go by key cycles and ignition cycles, this does not line up. But notice they don't give us any other key cycles. They don't even give us 1163. And then anything after that. And to me, a complete, transparent report would be the key cycles used to test John O'Keefe's car all the way through the night or complete day of January 29th, 2022, and even January 28th, 2022. We're going to need some of that leading up to. So at least from January 28th, 2022, till they did their testing of Karen Reed's vehicle, we should have a report and documentation of all the key cycles and information from that. But we do not have that in this exhibit. Now, whether the defense actually has it and it just wasn't used in the first trial because there wasn't an expert who could opine about that stuff because the ARCA witnesses were not allowed to testify on anything other than what was in their report that they did in the federal investigation. And Trooper Paul wasn't really knowledgeable, or he was skating around the truth, and they just picked a key cycle after their testing that looked like it could align with her hitting somebody. And he talks about he went by the odometer miles and some elapsed time. He didn't really even think about the key cycles. He just knows about the odometer reading. But let's dive further into this. So they're stating this is the information from key cycle 1162, and it talks about the vehicle speed being 24.2 miles per hour. And then you can also look at the shift position signal, 1 meaning forward, which is in drive, and 2 being in reverse. So on this little snippet, 2 is obviously in reverse, so they're saying in reverse at 24.2 miles per hour. Not calculating that there was snow and tires can possibly get stuck and rotate even if you're pressing on the gas, and you could be going nowhere in reality. And then the steering signals, which we will come to see what that is in a bit. The rest of it, I don't really understand fully, but nobody thought to explain it to us either. But at the top, if you'll notice, VCH time, these are in the 1100s, and the next one is not. So they pulled this snippet from somewhere, but I don't know where, because it didn't come from this next exhibit. So this exhibit is really hard to look at on the screen for this video, but what I was just talking about being in the 1100s, this one is in the 600s. And it's being pulled from the odometer reading of 12,629, which is key cycle 1162, according to Trooper Paul, and where they are alleging that Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe. So we do have a trigger at one point, and it's showing a trigger. None of these are very fast in their miles per hour, which is, you can see the trigger right here, and then the miles per hour is going to be these numbers here, which are very slow speeds. And then the shift position goes from 1, meaning in drive, 2 being reverse, and 1 in drive again. So a 3-point turn. Then it talks about brakes being on or off. At the 1s, they're on. 0, they are off. On, off. And then the steering signal, red meaning it is to the left, yellow meaning to the right, and of course red again to the left. This is the data that they said it gave the trigger, and she was backing up at 24 miles an hour in reverse. But the thing is if the trigger is here in the 600s and the speed during that trigger is actually 0 miles per hour in reverse, and the steering signal is to the left, wouldn't this be what speed you were looking at, not something in the 1100s? So what caused the trigger here? But it didn't cause a trigger in the other stuff that we saw a while ago. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and we didn't have anybody to really break it down and explain us to it, so we don't really understand this full data. But do we need to understand this data for this key cycle if it's not the correct key cycle? So we're going to start with key cycle 1160, and we're going to work our way towards when testing happened. This is as far back as we can go with the key cycles as far as video footage, because we do not have a picture or a video of anything of 1159, which to me would be when they're actually alleging Karen was at 34 Fairview and hit John O'Keefe. If we go by key cycles, and ignition cycles do equal a key cycle as well. So let's work through these. This is the video of her leaving her house, or leaving John O'Keefe's house. And this is the video we see where she backs into John's Chevy Traverse. So this to me is key cycle 1160. Now, let's say she goes and she's going to Jennifer McCabe's house. Now, let's say that from the time she goes, leaves here, and comes back with Jennifer McCabe and Carrie Reed, that she does not turn her car off. This is key cycle 1160. This is showing when Jennifer McCabe and Carrie Roberts are back at John O'Keefe's house, completing key cycle 1160. But if for some reason she did turn off her car when she got to Jennifer McCabe's and then turned it back on and drove back to John O'Keefe's and turned it off again, that would even mess up these key cycles even more, putting the hit of John O'Keefe allegedly at a further back key cycle than we already have it at. Still does not make it 1162 according to Trooper Paul when we look at reality. Now we talk about key cycle 1161 and 1162. So 1161 would be Karen Reed driving to her parents' house. Now, I don't know if she stopped at a gas station, turned her car off, and then got back in her car and continued to drive. Once again, that would flub the numbers as well, but these are just going on the ones that we have. And so that would even put more key cycles, pushing the timeline on these
This
key
video
cycles
captures the
further
vehicle
and further back
being
from
moved into position to be loaded up onto the flatbed
and
for transport from the
1162
scene.
is where the Commonwealth says that John O'Keefe was hit. But if we go by the data that we have, not adding in extra unknowns that possibly exist, 1162 would be Karen Reed getting on the tow truck. 1161, she arrives to her parents. 1162, she gets on the tow truck. And here we see, we will see that
The rear taillight is illuminated. You can see a white light
forward,
coming from that taillight.
reverse back in that heavy amount of snow, which could be 24 miles an hour, go forward. That's a 3-point, turning back again and going on to the tow truck. So we have a forward, a backwards, forward, backward, forward. In snow, she might have had to press the gas a little bit harder, and it could have reached 24 miles an hour with the snow, and the tires aren't actually spinning that fast. But let me know what you think. But this to me would be 1162, and in a common sense way, if we break down these ignition cycles and key cycles. Then we get to key cycle 1163. And 1163, if Karen Reed's vehicle was not moved from the Sally Port before testing, Karen Reed's vehicle arriving at the Sally Port, we see it pull in, would be key cycle 1163. But if the testing on the vehicle did not happen until Karen Reed's vehicle left the Sally Port in Canton and went to Milton Barracks or wherever it was, that would also add in another key cycle if we go off of Trooper Paul states that his testing or whoever's testing, the Commonwealth's testing, started at 1164 and the odometer reading from there. And we go backwards. This is where he is just not very accurate or experienced enough to understand this. And we're just breaking down the basics. So even if all that data makes sense, if we're looking at the wrong key cycle with the wrong miles per hour and reverse and driving forward and a trigger point, then that data for the wrong key cycle is actually null and void and doesn't matter. We need to make sure that we are looking at the correct key cycle of when this incident actually happened. So in review of ignition cycles that cause a key cycle that we know of, there are possibly some unknown driving and turning off of the car as well, which makes this even worse than Trooper Paul's testimony. But this would put it at 1159 key cycle. Karen's SUV was at 34 Fairview, dropping John O'Keefe off at the Alberts home. 1160 would be Karen Reed leaving John O'Keefe's house at that 5 a.m. video, hitting his Chevy Traverse, going to Jen McCabe's, and coming back and dropping the car back off at O'Keefe's house, 1160. Then 1161, if she did not drive her car at any other time during this time period, she drives to her parents' house in Dighton. 1162 would be Karen's Lexus being driven onto the tow truck at her parents' house in Dighton. 1163 would be the Lexus driving into the Sallyport from it getting off of the tow truck in Canton PD. And then 1164, testing on Reed's Lexus SUV. So that, to me, is a more correct breakdown of the key cycles in which Trooper Paul did not tell the jury correctly. And either it's just a lack of knowledge and they don't really know, they're just trying to submit something and it's not purposefully, or they are purposely putting in evidence that they know is not correct. But it was the only key cycle that possibly could explain her hitting, because none of the key cycle data on the other ones maybe showed that that could have happened. So they picked 1162. But the problem is, when you break down the data and understand how things work, it's not accurate. So are they purposely misleading and lying to the jury? Or is it that nobody is knowledgeable there? Or is it a combination of both? Let me know in the comments, and I hope this makes you understand key cycles and the events of Karen Reed's SUV on the night of John O'Keefe's death.